Hi, this is Timothy Zahn, author of Thrawn, and you're listening to Star Wars Reactions. Good for you.
There's been an awakening. Have you felt it?
In 1977, George Lucas formed a legacy.
The Force is with me, and I am with the Force.
Inspired by mythology, his saga has become a passion for many.
Feel the Force around you.
His legend has become our story.
It's true. All of it.
One of resistance,
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
rebellion,
Rebellion is built on hope.
and redemption.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This is Star Wars Reactions.
Remember, the Force will be with you. Always.
Happy New Year. Welcome to 2024 and welcome to Star Wars Reactions. We're so excited to have a show for you today. We hope your Christmas went well and we hope everybody had a safe and happy New Year last night. But we wanted to bring you this special episode. Let's get an introduction out of the way. I'm Aaron Harris. I'm one of the co-hosts here. My partner in crime, the fabulous David Motters, you will hear momentarily, as he had the opportunity a few days ago to sit down with the incredible Jason Fry. You've heard him on the show several times. Fabulous author, and they got to sit down and discuss the three stories Jason wrote for the series A Certain Point of View, the Star Wars books for New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Unfortunately, I was unavailable for those episodes, so it's just David and Jason. So sit back and enjoy part one of this series. It is fabulous. Trust me, I've listened to it. It is great. A lot of great information, insights. You're going to love it. So, David, take it away.
Welcome, everyone, to this very special episode of Star Wars Reactions. Tonight we have a returning guest and prolific Star Wars author, Jason Fry. And he is an author that all of you who listen to this podcast know, and you've most likely read his stuff. Just a sampling of some of his work is The Essential Guide to Warfare, right? The Star Wars Essential Guide to Warfare, the novelization of The Last Jedi. He has the Star Wars Servants of the Empire series, which all of you recall is set in Star Wars Rebels, and those books are a ton of fun. Star Wars The Last Jedi, incredible cross-sections, which I have signed by Jason himself. Star Wars in 100 Scenes, which he signed for my daughter at Star Wars Weekends. Star Wars The Clone Wars Ultimate Battles Visual Guide. Now, the biggie, another biggie that came out, and when we last spoke with Jason, it was not out yet. It is now out, Star Wars Timelines. And from a recent video I saw that Jason did, and I'm so thankful he did it, I'm now going to buy my second copy of Star Wars Timelines because there is the galaxy map in the back. And so that was something that Jason and the whole crew had announced that was only available at Star Wars Celebration, but now, like Jason said, happy surprises, and now you can get the map of the galaxy. So buy another copy of Star Wars Timelines. That's in my list to do. Also, you need to know the Jupiter Pirates series of books, and so many more. So, Ray books and Rose, and just every other kind of book imaginable for Star Wars. But let me just say and give a big welcome to author Jason Fry. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be back with you.
Well, nice. Yeah, I tried to list off a number of books, but when I look up your name and all the books you've done, it just ends up, it's pretty extensive. So anyways, I want to give people a feel for just some of the work that you've done. Now, we'd asked you to come back on, and you were so nice to do this. We had asked if you would come on and discuss the three stories that you've done from the Star Wars A Certain Point of View series of books from 2017, 2020, and now 2023, with the most recent one, Return of the Jedi, from a certain point of view. So I just wanted to start off with just kind of asking you how you got involved with it. Does Lucasfilm come to you with it, and all 40 authors and stuff like that? How does this come about?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, in general, yes, projects, it's pretty rare for an author to go out and really kind of beat the bushes for a project. It usually comes the other way around. There are exceptions. Like I like to say, Dan Wallace and I wrote the Essential Atlas essentially by haranguing everyone at Port Del Rey until they realized we weren't going to go away, and they just had to let us do our crazy book. But for the most part, it starts the other way around. And in this case, there was a really, really wonderful cause involved called First Book, which is a charity getting books to underprivileged kids to make sure they, like all the rest of us, can experience the joy of reading. So started with a really good cause and a really kind of fascinating idea to kind of take these certain points of view, if you were, and retell first A New Hope through those lenses, and a chance to be really creative and work in a short space that lets you experiment. And then I don't think any of us authors or the good folks at Random House, I don't think any of us could have guessed that the concept would work so well that we'd do it 2 more times. In fact, if anything, I suspect Random House might have gulped in terror once they realized what they'd gotten themselves into. But yeah, that was how it started. Just kind of this really fascinating kind of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead idea that so many talented authors, including Star Wars veterans and a lot of people who were new to Star Wars, signed on for it. And I was one of the lesser lights among them, but that was part of the great fun with that first book, and with all the succeeding books, was not just taking part as a writer, but getting to see these wonderful stories and see what some really talented authors did with characters and situations.
Yeah, I think I've either seen you talking about this online or maybe in an interview, maybe even at Celebration, but I was looking back. I have, of course, all 3 books hardcover, and I also have all 3 books on Audible, so I get to hear Mark Thompson and Jonathan Davis.
That's a treat.
Oh my gosh, read your words. It's just outstanding. So I've done both, read them in the hardcover books, and of course listened to them read all 3 of your stories. And I was trying to remember, Jason, I was looking at all 3 covers right now. I think you said you're one of 3, is that correct? Authors that is in all 3 books. Is that right? I think it's you, Tom Engelberger, and Adam Christopher?
That is correct. Yeah, okay. We're the 3x3 authors, absolutely.
That's pretty sweet. That's pretty cool. So I just wanted to mention that. I wanted to double check it with you. Again, looking at all the covers, I'm like, well, I think those are the big 3. So yeah. So I want to make sure I mentioned that just so people could know that. A little bit of trivia. That'll be a Star Wars trivia question here in time. Well, let's jump into each one. And so what I've done is just wrote a little quick 1-sentence synopsis of the story, and then I just wrote out a bunch of questions and talking points just to get your insight on each one. So what I was going to start with is just Star Wars from a certain point of view, and the first one's called Duty Roster. And in this story, you follow Call Tackbright, or Fake Wedge, and his desire to be on the pilot roster or the duty roster for the Death Star mission. And so one of my first questions as I was reading this is, can you help me, Jason, understand a little bit about how you chose this character, obviously along with Wedge and Biggs and all the other big names from that Death Star trench run. Like, how did you choose that character? And if there were other characters that you wanted to write about or in a different part of the book, or did you generally want to do this kind of towards the end of the movie, towards the end of the book? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Something that happens in these books is you may not always have your first choice. So you've got to have a couple of kind of plan Bs through E, etc. If I remember correctly, Fake Wedge was my plan B. Plan A, though, I wanted to do the last moments of Alderaan. I wanted to go there and see, what Bale and Brea saw at that last moment. I thought that would be a lot of fun. But somebody got there ahead of me, and that's fine. That's the way it goes. It's a really, really wonderful story by Madeline Rue. I think her last name is pronounced, and if not, I apologize. And the funny thing about that was something I had actually tried to write up for Essential Guide to Warfare, a little vignette about that. But those who know Essential Guide to Warfare, like, if you look at it, it's really clear that this, that I was known primarily as kind of a lore nonfiction author then, but you can see really clearly that I really wanted to write fiction because it's full of vignettes. And eventually they got to be just too many of them. And, the editor stepped in and was like, "You're really overdoing this. And, we don't want to step on future storytelling," which they were absolutely right about. So I had the hot idea when a certain point of view came along. I was like, "Oh yeah, this is my shot at that Alderaan moment." And then Madeline had gotten there first. So eventually I kind of got the universe that the message the universe was sending to me, and that's not your story to tell. You got to let it go. But that's the great thing about Star Wars. There are always more stories to go with. But what was interesting is my plan B was so different. And I think one thing that's helpful to understand here is, as that first From a Certain Point of View book was being put together, like, nobody thought this was all canon. It was all experiments in storytelling and kind of wild ideas, and that was the fun of it. So where I started out was sort of this meta joke about filmmaking. If you're a real Star Wars dork, you know that there's that the wedge that Luke talks to in the briefing room is not the wedge we see a few minutes later in an X-wing cockpit. And you further know, if you're really a Star Wars dork, you know that the voice of Wedge, which is fairly familiar to all of us, is not either one of the guys that we see on screen. So, Wedge is in some ways this very confusing character if you're, again, a hardcore Star Wars geek and a big film geek. And so I thought it'd be really fun to play with that and with the fan identification of the first actor as Fake Wedge. But it was all, really just kind of a meta joke on filmmaking. And I'll confess that I was actually a little horrified when, after a few months, all these stories got kind of written up as canon and treated that way. And I was like, wait a minute, this was just a geeky joke about movie making. Like, that really, really wasn't what I had in mind. Yet, for better or worse, here we are with Call Tech Bright. The other thing about this story, and then I'll hush up and let you ask your next question. Go. But the other thing that was really funny about that story is, if you think about it, like, I've described the joke. The actor who we first see playing Wedge is not Wedge. He's known among fans as Fake Wedge. Well, what if there really is a Fake Wedge in the movie world too? Okay, that is funny. But, that's the first kind of 500 words at most of a story. And, everybody kind of had the same reaction, like, yeah, that's funny, do that. But then I realized that, oh God, okay, I've got a funny premise, but now it's got to actually be turned into a story that has some emotional weight and that means something. And that was when I got scared, because I was like, all right, I've got to, not only land this plane, but I've kind of launched this plane, not sure if I can land it. I got to figure that out as we go. So that was the real challenge of that story. Not just, coming up with a cute idea, but then how do you turn it into a story that people would remember as more than a cute idea?
Well, oh my gosh. So now I've got 5 million more questions since you said that. No, what is this? I did have a question, and I didn't know. I guess they say there's no bad questions, but before I jumped on with you, and over the last, I don't know, of course, I've read these multiple times and listened to them multiple times. I was asking myself, I'm like, wait, are the from a certain point of view books considered canon? Or are they like, you know, Jason, like sometimes people mention like Lego, like they're canon adjacent, right? The Star Wars Lego movies and stuff like that. But did you get word of that, Jason, as this thing got put together and then boom, they're printing it and they put the covers on this book? Did they say that to you authors that this is considered canon now?
Not that I remember, though granted it's been a while. I'm pretty sure it didn't work that way. I think it was more that the readers, the fans, kind of accepted them as canon and started treating that way, and then everybody kind of went along with that. So I don't know. It'd be actually really interesting to ask Lucasfilm if they consider this canon. I'm not really sure what the answer is there. And frankly, I don't really particularly care, not in a dismissive way. I mean, the story is the story, and it's to be enjoyed for itself. And the larger ramifications of that wouldn't really bother me either way. What I will say though is, when I wrote but also a Wedge story in Empire, Fekpov, and then the Simalu story in Jedi, I did for round 2 and 3, I did know they were being treated that way. So, I was pretty attentive to that. Well, I was actually pretty attentive to it in Duty roster too. Like I did a lot of work on the pilot roster of Red Squadron to make sure that it fit. And an interesting there is that pilot roster had just been sort of revised because of Rogue One. Rogue One had brought us a bunch of pilots, so it was no accident that the pilots that used to be identified as Red Squadron in things like really the Decipher card game, I think was first, but then they're all identified in Guide to Warfare. Like I just, I took all the sudden rejects and kind of had them sitting around the holotable with poor fake Wedge called Tech Right. Because, another kind of meta joke, like they'd all essentially been grounded. But, if you do your Star Wars lore, like you were like, wait a minute, I've read versions of this where those guys were up there. On the other hand, they all died. So I guess it turned out better for them that way.
That's right. Well, you and also the question about canon. I was thinking about when you mentioned wanting a plan A to write about Alderaan, and then you said, "Well, let me do this on fake Wedge." Is a question I wrote down over the last few nights was. I didn't know in the process, Jason, if all the authors touch base with each other, or if that's more like, the editors of the book, or because I was thinking about particularly the authors who are writing, directly before you and after you, because I was looking at some of the stories before and after your stories and some of the overlap and some of them and stuff like that. Did you guys have to do that, or is it more the editors saying, no, we've got this, you write what you want to write, Jason, and we'll get this other person to do the last minutes of Alderaan or other aspects of the trench run and things like that? Or do you consult with the other authors in this process?
No, the coordination was all put together by Tom Holler and the wonderful editorial team there at Del Rey. We didn't have to worry about it. And my hat is off to all those men and women, because I mean, just that's writing a story is difficult, but I think we as readers, certainly as authors, we like to exaggerate how difficult it is. You figure out the story, you put it out in the world, and it works or it doesn't, depending on the reader. But what's immensely harder is getting all those stories to fit together and not feel too kind of ungapachki, to make them sort of feel like a whole. And so, yeah, hats off to Tom and everyone at Del Rey who worked on these books because, I mean, for the most part, they feel really seamless.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, I was going to say this to you, when you talk about doing this story, I want to say this to you, the way you ended the story from that angle not seen in the movie, Call Bright being there in another part of the Yavin hangar and getting there and waiting for Wedge and Wedge coming out of his X-Wing. I was just in tears. I literally in tears. And, I guess my question is, well, you said it a minute ago, right, Jason? You said, well, I launched this thing. I'm trying to fly it. I start off with this kind of comment, this joke about fake Wedge and movie making, which I think is brilliant. And then you land it with this really moving scene because like what I visualized, Jason, was I can see Luke and Leia and Han meeting, even, C-3PO looking at R2-D2 all burned up from getting hit during the Death Star battle. But then in another part of the hangar, I can visualize absolutely what you wrote. And it's just kind of like this lesser known, kind of like not Luke, but it's like Wedge and Call Bright. And I was moved to tears. How did you figure out landing it that way? Because I thought it was brilliant. From me laughing and like you said, as a joke, but also having some tears as well. How did you do that? How did you come up with that?
It's really kind of, with anything, with a novel, with a story, it's going to, what's the emotional heart? What's the engine that makes it work? And, for me, it's not on Luke and Leia. That's another story. You've got Call who is feeling rejected and angry and has to kind of let the better angels of his nature come back and think about, the shared sacrifice and what those other pilots are fighting for and get kind of reinvested in it. But then it's also about Wedge. Like, he's so jealous of Wedge, who is already confused whether he gets to be up there. But then, getting reinvested lets him see things through Wedge's eyes. And then, what's happened to Wedge? He's had to pull off. He's left Luke, he's left Luke there to face the Empire alone, unguarded, and he's returned to the Rebel base. Like, Wedge. Wedge feels like a quitter. Like he let people down, and he is not. He's of course happy for Luke, but he's carrying a lot of guilt, and so that was an opportunity for Call's stories and Wedge's stories to come back together and to enhance each other. And for me, that was the real heart of the story, was there. What's it like to be the guy who left the trench? What's it like to be the other X-Wing that survived? How do you feel knowing there are 10 craft that didn't, and wondering should you be among them? And one of the things I liked was in the Empire story, which also features Wedge. You see that guilt still working, and Wedge is still, that's kind of a 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling thing that still bothers Wedge. And he has a conversation with the Contessa where she sort of, rejects that out of hand. And, she is a pilot and knows what he did and how heroic it was. But, I thought it was significant that Wedge still kind of can't get there. But in that story, it's a chance for him and Call's stories to come together.
Oh, I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant. In fact, I was going to mention that I really loved how in the Empire story, Rendezvous Point, you have the Contessa reiterate how Wedge and what he did in the Death Star run. I love that you put it there and did that again. But I have to admit, here's where the certain point of view, you're getting me as a reader to think about that. As a young kid watching the movie in the theater as an 8-year-old, I didn't think about that. And now from this book and this story, I guess I never thought about him feeling that way. And I love how you pulled that together, and again, or referenced it in the Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view, which I will get to. I will definitely get to. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Jason, about each one, and this is kind of the in the first story here, is just, are there any Easter eggs that people haven't found since this, story in this book was released in 2017? Is there anything in there that people haven't picked up on, or I haven't seen or picked up on?
It was, let me think. I haven't prepped for that. It was a long time ago. But it was obviously fun to, go back and look at all those pilots, whether they were in the revised duty roster or not. That was interesting. It was really fun to tie it into Rogue One, which was still really new then. That was interesting. There's some stuff about, there's all this lore dating back to Legends about all this lore going back to Legends about where the various pilots came from and various squadrons put together. So yeah, it was good to reference that. I think the biggest thing I remember was, it was fun coming up with a name for Call. Call is obviously from Colin Higgins, who's the actor in the first one, but then getting him a last name was an interesting challenge. Tack is actually a character that Colin Higgins played on some science fiction show I'd never heard of. And to be honest, I'm not really sure where Bright came from at this point. I think anyone looks at Colin Higgins' IMDb, he'll probably find what I had in mind, but I don't remember. It was also, another thing I liked is I really liked getting able to be in the Yavin control room. That's a big part of the novelization. There's some fun stuff there, and it was nice to be able to kind of revisit that and see how that would play out. I did a lot of work on the moment that we kind of don't see of, when the Death Star kind of disappears from the tactical board and everybody sort of holds their breath and then figure out what it means. That was a lot of fun to show. So, yeah, I'm sure there's some Easter eggs lurking in there, and I don't know, maybe some of the listeners can be like, "Hey, dummy, you forgot this one."
No,
yourself. But mostly, it was just the fun of telling a story that I've obviously known for years and really enjoyed, and just getting a chance to tell it, as they say, from a certain point of view.
Well, when you mentioned Rogue One, the way that you incorporated Rogue One, with this book coming out in 2017, of course, Rogue One was December of 16, right? Just like you said.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah, it was so fresh. Your comments about Scarif and some of the people who fought there, I thought that was just brilliant how you put that in, and I thought, I guess, is this kind of like an Easter egg, but really more of, I guess, kind of a world building, but also it feels like you're fully flushing out, kind of like, well, how can Luke go from Tatooine to flying an X-Wing? I love the comment that you had, Biggs, and I quoted it here, and I thought it was so cool. And Biggs says, if you can handle a Skyhopper, you can handle an X-Wing. And I just really like that, because you're just, to me, I feel like you're adding to the whole story and really conveying, it's not just Luke's inherent Force abilities, but he has these experiences, and you interwove that throughout the whole story about the Womp Rat kid and shooting Womp Rats and how this is bothering Koltak Bright, and I thought that was just great. And you got me thinking, Jason, when we had you on last was back in April for the think I was looking at that correctly. The January, February, March, April, the season finale of season 2 of the Bad Batch, and we were talking to you about Star Wars names, and you had mentioned Valance and how you came up with his first name, and you got me thinking about it when you were mentioning Cole and then Tack and Bright, and that is something that I was wondering as I was reading all three of these. In particular, well, no, all three, the pilots, and then I think about all the pilots that you have in Rendezvous Point, and then when I think about the Imperial Ruling Council, all these different names and stuff like that. But I guess we can get to each one at a time. But yeah, I just thought in terms of that, your incorporation of Rogue One, I thought was just great, and it's seamless, right? That's how I felt it was. But good stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. It's really a credit to Rogue One, though. I mean, that's such a wonderful way that Rogue One deepens A New Hope in so many ways, but that's one of them. I mean, it's just a couple of days before the Battle of Yavin, and how do they even put a squadron together after having lost so many things? And that ties in with why would you leave pilots? You see all those pilots in the throne room scene, so why would you not put them up there? And that's the answer. They can barely get 12 ships to fly. To me, that was, I mean, the genius there isn't me, it's Rogue One. But it did tie into something that I do think I played some effective notes on, which is, of course, all these pilots are dedicated to the rebel cause, et cetera. I mean, that's the lesson that Call has to learn. But, these are stick jockeys. They're rivals. They're all gung-ho. And they're, competing for a very few slots. And, that's what's eating a Call, but it would eat at all of them. I mean, who is this farm boy who drops in and gets handed one of the precious starfighters and takes somebody else's spot? That's that was an aspect of it that we never saw in the movie that I thought would be really fun to play with.
Well, to piggyback off what you just said, Jason, I'm thinking about how you had Garvin Dreis, right? Dreis, Red Leader, right? And he does what you said. He makes the comment, and before any of you complain, I'm picking Skywalker because we wouldn't have the princess here, and we'd be going up against this battle station with nothing, no information. Yep. And I thought that was just brilliant. I know I'm using the word a lot, but I'm telling you, man, you talk about making reading fun and making Star Wars come more alive. I love how you do that. Again, comments by Biggs, comments about Scarif, comments by Dreis. Well done. I love that stuff. You want to move on to Rendezvous Point? Do we want to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I mean, I could keep talking about Duty Roster for a long time, but I know I want to be respectful of your time, and I got a bunch of questions about this on Rendezvous Point. So, just for our listeners, this story focuses on Wedge Antilles and Wes Jansen working to form a new squadron to address pirates who've been raiding the Alliance's supply line and potentially compromising the Alliance's rendezvous point. One of the first things that I wrote down, Jason, was your use of humor throughout this story. I'm starting to laugh as I wonder. Tauntaun Musk, highly decorated napper, and even at the very end when Mon Mothma is looking at the Contessa, I think, exasperated, and says, pilots. Just great stuff. The pranking, the pranks between Jansen and him getting Wedge with the little thing that releases the Tauntaun Musk, just brilliant. How do you develop that humor, and how do you know how much to use? As you sprinkle that throughout this particular story.
I mean, humor, I think, is something you unfortunately either have or you don't. It's not a muscle you can develop from nothing. but the blueprint for the humor in this story is, and this I don't think it's to be a surprise to anyone who's read Rendezvous Point, was the X-Wing novels by Mike Stackpole and Aaron Alston. And I like so many other people, I just love those books so much. And this whole story was conceived as an homage to those books. The interplay between Wedge and Jansen is right out of those books, as well as some of the pilots who they wind up tapping are names familiar to people who know those books. And there's even a kind of meta yub yub joke, which is really particularly shameless because, of course, this happens before Return of the Jedi, so I had to figure out how to kind of engineer that one. So yeah, and that's something I knew I wanted to do from the very beginning, was a love letter to the X-Wing novels. As for the proportions of it, I mean, it's a little bit like the question about duty roster being kind of a meta joke about filmmaking. Like, the humor's great, but it's not enough. You've got to find the engine of the story. And, for me, that was Wedge accepting the mantle of leadership and then proving to the reader, if not to himself, why he deserved it. And so, that the humor's fun, and hopefully people enjoyed it, and hopefully the humorous Easter eggs got spotted. But the story ultimately is going to work on whether you are convinced by the leadership Wedge shows and what it means to those other pilots. So yeah. But yeah, a really, really fun story to do. I mean, one that's very dear to my heart. I think it's the longest story in the book. It's almost kind of a mini novel, but I guess the last thing I'd say about it is I'm pretty sure, I don't remember, but I think Wedge in this case was my first choice. So this was the story I really wanted to write from the beginning, and I got to do it. So that was nice. But having done that, I mean, it was very consciously written to be the opposite of duty roster. I mean, there's not a lot of kind of filmmaking, meta jokes, etc. I really wanted it to be like kind of a miniature X-Wing novel dropped in the middle of this book. So yeah, I mean, I think the two stories play off each other in terms of tone and approach in ways that I hope are interesting.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I it's so good to speak with you and ask you, because after duty roster, I thought, I wonder if, like, from the beginning in my mind, I'm like, I wonder, Jason wanted to, even though he has Call Tagbright, he wants Wedge in there, and he has Wedge in Rendezvous Point. When we go to Colonels and Huss, wow, what a change, and I want to get to that, and what a different a story, and just chilling, and we'll get to it. I want to jump ahead, but I want to make sure I cover Rendezvous Point. So, in this, asking you about the humor, and like you said, and you mentioned, what is the heart of the story again? Yeah, I buy it. It's seeing him take this on with Jansen is great. I do like double M for Mon Mothma. That's another. Yeah. That is good. Here's another example where I feel, and I don't know if it's. I was going to ask you if Lucasfilm asked you to do this, or if it's something that you like to do, just like you did with Duty Roster and incorporating Scarif to really build up, and like you said, kind of explain, well, why do they have 12 numbers, or why do they have so few birds to fly? And you're explaining that because of the issues that happen at Scarif. Here, I really like how you bring in Sky Strike Academy, from Rebels. Hobby and that history, and how you bring in Sabine Wren, and even Phoenix Squadron you mentioned, and so as I'm reading this, my eyes are lighting up, and just I love all those like kind of aha, like I think little dopamine shots, right, Jason, when you put all those things in there. Even like I put a note to myself, referring to Wedge's work at Death Star 1, which the Contessa mentions. But like, is that stuff that you want to put in to fully flesh it out? Does Lucasfilm want to say, hey, will you put some of these things in because we've now added these animated shows and movies and stuff like that? How does that play out for you?
No, that was all me. I think for me, it's a satisfying story if you can weave that together without having it be showy or performative. This story is going to wind up as kind of a mini biography of Wedge. I mean, that's why the Contessa, et cetera, is picking it and asking him to do this. So, of course, those things are going to be in there. If anything, if I remember correctly, though I don't quite remember why, which would probably be a little frustrating. If anything, I had to take some stuff out, like the Wedge's having lost people was a little vague in the story, which was by request. And I was really kind of irked at Lucasfilm because in the Rebels episodes, he's got a helmet that says Mala on it, which is a Legends character who dies, who he fights for. And I was like, why am I not allowed to do that? But that's all right. These things happen. But yeah, I mean, it's always fun to kind of tie stories together. I think the key commandment there, though, is as I said before, is not having it be performative. It should never overshadow the story. For instance, like there's, Cinda Tarheel is in there, who's a really, really ancient Marvel character who shows up in one story of the original run and then is never seen again. Hightower is another one who's very briefly in the original Marvel run. But, so that part is fun for really veteran fans who remember oddball things like that the way I do. But it's got to work in the story. And I picked Cinda because that character worked there. Just an Easter egg alone isn't enough. It's got to really work in the story. The thing I had the most fun in that story was actually Scylla Cott. She's really kind of a pretty important character in there. I worked really hard on making her really work as a character in her own right. And she's really kind of Wedge's primary challenge and also kind of a proof of the leadership he shows, but it comes at a cost, and there's more to be explored there. And I was thrilled when she got her own story in the Jedi one, and that some of that backstory was referenced. I mean, that's really kind of the fun of this, is seeing other creators run with things and take them to interesting places. But Scylla was a character who meant a lot to me in this story, and I worked really hard on making her interesting and a character you wanted to know more about, even though you're only going to see her very briefly. I mean, all these stories are really, really short. So as authors, as storytellers, you're really kind of working down to the bone. You've got to work really quick. There really can't be very much fat in them at all. Everything's got to count. Which can be a challenge, but is a fun one.
Well, I'm looking at my notes. I took tons of notes on all three, and I have Cott here and how she saves Wedge, and her real challenge to him, talking about killing others. And boy, you nailed it. And you talk about getting me. I love how you contrasted that. You have this super deep issue that she's struggling with, and I loved it, and I loved how she presents it to Wedge, and then Wedge sharing some of his backstory about his first kill, right? And then I think about how you contrast it with pranks, and you even have a section in there, where I'm trying to remember the character who asked, well, wait, are pranks helpful? And you're just able to hit both ends, right? From the kind of the lightheartedness that pilots have to do to kind of keep themselves even keel to the seriousness of killing others. But you did a great job on that. I wanted speaking of,
Actually, I've got a fun Easter egg for you there, which
oh,
you
please,
might like. The pranks thing was interesting. It came out of another project. I did I was approached by Del Rey for this, and I did a behind the scenes oral history of this really really wonderful off Broadway play called Puffs, which is a Harry Potter parody, but it's much more than that. It's a parody with real heart that winds up telling its own story. That's really wonderful, and it's Puffs has become like this hugely popular high school and secondary school production because because of Harry Potter, but also because it's just a cracking good story. It's really really fun. So I was doing this oral history of Puffs for a project that ultimately got canceled, which was a shame because they decided to close the show, and so the book went away. But so I had spent like months and months like talking to all these actors, and one of the things they talked about in all their stories were pranks, like during shows, like actors pranking each other, like grabbing each other's backpacks and and kind of trying to mess each other up and stuff like that. And not having a theater background, I was just fascinated by that, and I was like, why would you do that? That seems so insane. And what they said was exactly what the pilots say in this book, that it's a way of keeping rote away and keeping everybody sharp. And it keeps people from falling into routines and messing up that way. And that's the enemy of a good show. And I was like, that would work absolutely for combat. But, as with combat, as with theater, the pilots, Wedge makes very clear to Scylla when she asks the question I asked, that there are lines and there are lines drawn. There are ways it isn't done. And I worked on that Puffs book with people on the team at Del Rey who wound up doing this. So I knew they'd enjoy it, and that was a lot of fun. Like, hey, remember this from our book that isn't going to come out? But it also, it worked perfectly for that story, and that was a nice bit of serendipity.
oh my gosh, yeah. I love how you bring in R5, who wants to pop open the canopy, and I love Wedge. No, I'm serious. No, it is a contaminant, but no, I'm more serious. Like, do not pop this open. I'm fine. I can deal with it. Just so well done. Just so well done. But yeah, the contrast between super serious and pranks. I was gonna just like I did with Duty Roster. I was gonna ask you on Rendezvous Point if there was any kind of Easter eggs that people haven't found since its release in 2020. Like, I initially, when I saw Cinda Tar Heel, the first thing I thought about is like, wait, is Jason kind of referencing back to Cinda from the 1980s Ewok TV adventures? The name Cinda.
Oh yeah.
But now you shared a few minutes ago that it came from the original Marvel run, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I was gonna.
Yeah, that was fun. Actually, you had asked earlier. This was a case where there was a little coordination with authors, not with another author. I should better check that. Yeah, like the Contessa is a character of Claudia Gray's from Lost Stars, and I really, really loved that character and wanted to use her here. But now, an ironclad rule of writing for Lucasfilm and really writing for any IP is, character situations, etc. Like, everybody has to share their toys. Like, you can't claim something and it's yours and no one else can touch it. It doesn't work that way. And one of the many delights about working for Star Wars is every author understands that. At the same time, there is a certain deference. If characters are very identified with certain authors, if they're their creations, etc. So, I wanted to use the Contessa, but I went to Claudia and said, hey, I want you to read, this backstory that she relates to Wedge, and, make sure it's okay with you. And then, make sure that I've read the character properly and she feels right to you. Which, again, not something any of us have to do, but a bit of authorial courtesy, because I love that character so much and kind of had my eye on her for a role in this story. So, yeah, there's a little coordination that was done.
That's cool. I'm looking at all my Star Wars books here, including a ton of yours in front of me in my bookshelf, and I'm looking at Lost Stars right there by Claudia Gray. That's really cool to hear that there is that. It seems, just very. I hear you about the IP that anybody can use these, but it just makes sense. It's a respectful kind of thing to check in with people and get that background from her. Looking at some of these little details and again, maybe some Easter egg kind of stuff. I thought it was interesting when you did this, and I don't know that this is really an Easter egg, but almost more of I don't know if this was kind of an inside joke for us Star Wars fans, Jason, when you did Princess Leia, and immediately you got me thinking, Jason, about Han and Han and all the different things that we say in Star Wars and how do you say it properly. But was that you just kind of like a wink and a nod to us that you can have fun with saying names differently?
Oh, yeah, having fun with it. I mean, it is kind of bizarre that Han and Lando can't decide how to pronounce the princess's name, but okay, it's in the movie, so may as well have fun with it.
I thought that was good. I did want to mention that, and then I guess is there anything else in there that I didn't pick up on? I did notice you said that Hobby had comforted Wedge when he was left off the duty roster raid on Scarif. And then Hobby was grounded for the Battle of Yavin. So I guess when you mentioned that about Wedge, I guess that's something that you created, right? That he was left off the duty roster for the raid on Scarif, I guess, yes?
Oh no, that came from the Rogue One production. Because Wedge, remember, says, "Look at the size of that thing." In A New Hope, and gets kind of rebuked for it. But the indication there is he's never seen the Death Star. Which if he was at Scarif and survived, he would have seen it. So that was and that's why we hear Wedge very briefly in the movie telling pilots to get to their fighters. And Hobby being left off at Yavin, that comes from. It's not the original Marvels. It's it's one of the modern Marvel runs. There's a story back there where he has some sort of terrible virus or something, and gets left off. And so that was a kind of fun Easter egg. I got a lot of pressure, frankly, from friends of mine who are giant Hobby fans. And of course, Hobby has such a role in those X-Wing novels, and they were all begging me to make Hobby not have died in Empire, which he does in new canon. Well, he does in the original movie, and then that was ignored in Legends or possibly overlooked, but he now does in new canon. And so a lot of friends of mine were convinced that I would resurrect Hobby, but I was like, that's not really my call. You got to go to a higher authority. But I did try to, once again, pay homage to, how much his loss is still a source of hurt for Wedge and Jansen. And, that has to work in the story. But, people who read the X-Wings books will, I think, understand what else is being said there.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I wanted to mention to you too, talking about an Easter egg for me, I look back, duty roster pages 377 to 392, so about 25 pages. Like you mentioned, Rendezvous Point, page 151 to 179. and then Kernels and Husks, pages 163 to 173. Now, I say that because on page 163, you make a reference to reverse psychology. And I was like, yes, as a clinical psychologist, for you to have reverse psychology in there, you made my day. So that's just a little, I don't know, personal Easter egg for me. I love seeing the word psychology in a Star Wars story. So that's always good.
That's right, David. That was good. And that was part 1 of the interview. Part 2 will be coming up very soon. You'll see that coming up later this week. We just want, of course, let you know if you do want to contact David, you can always hit him up on Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, at David_Motters, or Instagram at David Motters. Of course, you can hit me up anytime on X, which is formerly known as Twitter, at TA Harris 121079. Of course, we do have all of our show social media currently available as well. You can hit us up at at SW Reactions Pod on Facebook and X, SW Reactions on Instagram, Threads, Pinterest, oh my gosh, Carabast. I'm Carabasting a solo part. Go kidding. Tumblr, where you can find a lot of our show notes. Of course, we're also at SW Reactions now on TikTok as well. So check us out there. You can email us anytime at swreactions@gmail.com. Or, of course, you can leave us a voicemail, speakpipe.com/Star Wars Reactions. We definitely look forward to hearing from you. Stay tuned for part 2. Like I said, that'll be coming out in the next episode. So be on the lookout for that. Until then, Happy New Year. Thank you for listening. Start the year off right. Do something kind for somebody. Get the new 2024 off on the right foot. Make this a year of kindness and change. Remember, this is your place for elegant discussion for a more civilized age.
If you'd like to share your thoughts, you can email us at show@starwarsreactions.com for our show notes and the latest news from the Star Wars universe. Visit our website at www.starwarsreactions.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at SWReactionsPod or on Facebook at Star Wars Reactions. If you enjoy our show, please leave a review on iTunes. This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or by Lucasfilm Limited. It's intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars. All names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and the respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Star Wars Reactions unless otherwise indicated. Star Wars Reactions. Elegant discussion for a more civilized age.